I went to high school in the late 90s, where tolerance was just starting. I went to high school in eastern North Carolina, and people knew I was different. I walked differently, and I spoke differently. It was a small farming high school. They loved to tell me all the things that I should be. They loved to define me. And I was horrifically insecure about who I really was. I faked it a lot. The only time I felt peace was when I would go and visit my grandmother. She had this big farm, and you could escape there. And we all know those places that you love to escape. And it was there. My grandmother was just like me, if you know what I mean. And we would take these just walks, and she had tons of land on her farm, and there were these wonderful trees, these beautiful oak trees, and together we would pick acorns. It was a special memory for me. We'd pick the best ones, fresh off the tree with that shiny brown look. It was a simple time. I loved it. She told me something, and she said, "You need to tell yourself the truth about who you really are. Come to grips with that." And I remember the day that I did it. I was wearing cargo pants. It was the 90s. I was wearing this yellow hoodie, and I was sitting on a park bench back at home downtown, and I said to myself, I'll never forget it, I love nuts because I'm a squirrel. And I didn't fit in the human world. Okay, I'm kidding, I'm lying. I'm actually not a squirrel, I'm a human being. I did play a squirrel for a couple of weeks in a movie, and I tried to make it really convincing. Now, when I talk about lying, I don't mean it the way we do here in the Bible Belt. I don't mean it with this immoral sense, and I don't mean it with a sin nature attached to it. I just mean it with the intention to deceive. That's kind of the definition. Just the intention to deceive. And I like to do that, and you do too, every day. So I decided as an actor, I'd always grown up as an actor. My mom was an actress, and of course I was in like every church play and all kinds of things. And I decided that, man, this was my way of escaping. I really did love it, wanted to explore it. Now, about a decade ago, I decided I want to get into film and television, which is different than theater. The training's a little different. You get this camera lens so close, and directors would say things like, well, they can tell your thoughts. You know, the camera can see it. And that makes you very vulnerable and a little exposed. And so I noticed that when I started studying film and television, that when you do a great job, the critics will say things like, that was such an honest performance. So truthful. The integrity of that character work. So organic, natural, believable. And when you're not good at it, you might get a critique such as you were stagey and fake, and we could tell you were lying. And that kind of stings, I'm going to be honest with you. That hurts. But I really wasn't a squirrel. Of course I'm pretending. And that's not my voice. I'm not a 6-foot-tall rodent. I mean, that's not who I am. So naturally, and no one gets offended at Elmo. You know, like when your kids are playing pretend, we're kind of deceiving them, right? So let's go on a journey about studying how we can be a little more authentic when it's time to perform. There's tons of methods in acting. They're all kind of like religions. And so when you study a method, that instructor is probably going to tell you this is the one true way to get to truth. And it's very interesting. And there are thousands of exercises to being more authentic when you're lying. And I will say some of these are going to be simple, but they're not easy. It takes, for some of them, almost 20 years to become good at it. There are 2 questions that every actor starts with. And these are 2 questions we should all be using. What do I want? And how do I get it? A lot of you start with the what do I want. You're pretty good at setting objectives, intentions. I want the jury to agree with me. I want the PTA to go with this little legislation. I want the teacher-student conference to go this way. I want my son to pay more attention to this. I'd like for my wife to listen. I don't want to problem solve. I just want to fix it. All these kinds of things. So you're setting the objective, but you're not really setting the tactic. That's the phrase, tactic, an action verb. That's what I'm looking for. The how do I get it? See, a lot of you just have 2 or 3 tactics that you use all the time in your life. Just 2 or 3. And the people in your life know when you're starting to use just those 2 or 3 tactics, and that's when they no longer want to pay attention to you, and that's when they stop listening to you, and they just put up that little wall. Tactics are what make people very interesting. Let me give you an example. You're baking a cake. It's going to be great. You have just hit an obstacle because you realize you don't have enough sugar to make the cake. So what do I want? I got to make a cake. I don't have any sugar. I want sugar. How am I going to get it? Well, your neighbor's got some sugar, so maybe you can go get some sugar from your neighbor. So what'll be interesting is you're going to come up with a cool tactic to do it. I'm going to flirt to get some sugar. Now, depending on your neighbor, you might kick it up a notch and try to get a little sugar with the sugar. Yeah. But maybe you're not attracted to your neighbor or you're not in an open relationship, so you might need to plead. I got to have this sugar, please. You don't know how important this is. And if that doesn't work, you could guilt them. Maybe you could say, you gave me sugar, I gave you sugar last week, so hey, you got to give me the sugar this week. And if you don't, I'll kidnap your kids, and that's blackmail. That's a different tactic. Probably don't use that tactic. Don't do that one. Let's not do that. So you see, figuring out what you want and how you're going to get it is what makes you entertaining. Go to Google and type in action verbs and just see all the random choices. When you're giving a presentation and you're talking to the people at your office, you probably only have one tactic. Go find some new ones. They'll start listening a little bit more because it'll be brand new. Now, when you start studying acting, we're going to tell you something when you walk into a studio. We're going to say, stop worrying about how you look. Stop being self-conscious. This is super important. When it comes to film and television, I'm going to tell you, can you become self-aware? It's a little different. We had this gentleman that came in to start working with me. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep. And he wasn't doing well, and so his boss sent him to train with me how he could be a better salesman. When he walked into my studio, I was scared to death. This dude was 6'7". He was a bodybuilder. So when he walks in, his body language is already telling a story without saying a word. And I asked him to do a sales pitch, and I was even more scared. He was very aggressive. And I said, "What are you doing?" "I'm making a sales pitch." No. Like, what is your tactic? What are you doing? What's the verb? "Oh, I'm showing that I'm confident." Nah, you're not doing that. Because every time he would talk to me, he was telling me what he was doing. And I said, "What do you do before you go do your sales?" He's like, "Man, I love to go to the gym and hit the heavy bag." Man. So he wasn't self-aware. So until I recorded him, he didn't know that the story he was telling was, "I'm going to murder you." instead of, like, he probably would have done way better if he flirted or seduced. But he didn't. He didn't do that. You want to play a fun game at an office party. After a few drinks, here's what you do. Say, we're going to play a game of charades, everybody. And I want you to only do an impression of someone else at the office. And you'll become self-aware really quickly. Because when you do an impression, you overdo the personal habits of someone. And you turn it into a cartoon character of what they are in real life. There's another part of being self-aware, and that's the listening part of being self-aware. A lot of you don't know your listening face, and you're unable to get what you want because you're telling a bad story to the person who's trying to give you information to help you get what you want. Your listening face speaks volumes. This is the face that you're resting, the muscles in your face, when they're resting, they are already telling a story. Now, it's very interesting. If you were to go look at pictures that you're tagged in social media, not the ones where you're like cheesing, you're slaying it. Not those pictures. But the ones where you're in the background and randomly got tagged in, you might be able to tell the type of face that you have. We often refer to this sometimes as resting bitch face. It's a technical term. It's Shakespearean, something like that. So I would love to challenge you to be a little more self-aware. Finally, I want to share with you, and I'd like for us to talk about something super important. Now, we talked about the objective. What do you want and how do you get it? Okay, we talked about that. Now, if they were to make your life into a movie, and every scene in the movie was about you fulfilling an objective, getting what you want. Or an even better way of explaining it, if we were to open the DVD cover and look at all the titles of the chapters. Drew's born, Drew gets his first bike, he gets baptized, he plays his first tennis tournament, blah, blah, blah. If we were to do that in your life, and we were to look at all of those things in the descriptions of every scene in your life, there would be a common theme. Now, we call this in the acting world a super objective. So if we added all these together and came up with this sum, it would be a super objective. I learned about this from a man named Larry Moss. You all have a super objective right now. I have a super objective. This super objective is what is fueling your entire life. And it is what totally determines whether you are authentic in everything that you do. Because if you're unaware of it, you're faking everything. And it goes a little something like this. I want you to ask yourself what you want, and then I want you to ask yourself, why do you want it, until you get to the core of your foundation. Drew, what do you want? I want to have a good job. Why? Because if I have a good job, I'm going to have plenty of money, vacation time. I'll be able to take care of my wife and my daughter. Why? Because then I'll be a great provider. And that makes me feel good to know that I'm providing and taking care of people that I love. Why? Because my parents were really good providers, and they did a great job. And so I would like to be like them. Why? Because they mean a lot to me. And I care what my parents think. Why? Because I would like for my parents to notice me. Just once. And if I have those things, I know they'll pay attention to me. So what's your super objective, Drew? That everything I've ever done for the 36 years I've been alive has been to get 2 people to pay attention to me. And I look forward to the day I get an attaboy from them. Until I realized what my super objective was, I had no interesting tactics. I was incapable of telling anybody else's story because I was always trying to get 2 people to notice me. I couldn't be truthful in any of the lies I was telling on stage or on camera because I was secretly trying to get the attention of other people. Because I desperately cared how I looked, and I wasn't self-aware, and I had no interesting tactics. The same is true for you. And I really wish I would have started studying film acting a lot sooner. Because that super objective drives you, and it pushes you, and it can be a great thing, and sometimes it's a not so great thing. Do you know what your super objective is? Do you know the story you've been telling? Are you a bad liar? Are you an honest storyteller? Jimmy Cagney had some great advice on being a professional liar, actor. And he said this, so simple. Find your mark, plant your feet, look the other fella right in the eye. Now tell him the truth.